Zambia's opposition leader is arrested for the second time in 6 months. Gambia's vice president in the United States. What does the country's future hold after 2 decades of one-party rule? And Pope Francis opens a free laundromat for Rome's homeless. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We'll have those stories shortly, but first, despite the icy relations between the two countries, the Kremlin says the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has separately met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday after wrapping up a 4-hour meeting with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow over Syria. The Tillerson-Lavrov meeting came just as President Putin declared on Russian television that trust between the U.S. and Russia is eroding under the administration of President Donald Trump. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says his government had a lot of questions about ambiguous and contradictory ideas coming from the new administration of U.S. President Donald Trump. The Russian envoy referenced last week's U.S. strike on a Syrian airbase, which was launched in response to a deadly chemical weapons attack on Idlib province.
We believe in collective actions, and we do not think it's effective to have behind closed door alliances, 2 alliances.
Well, Tillerson was more brief in his opening statement, but like Lavrov, he said Wednesday's talks would include a frank discussion of their differences and mutual interests.
Our meetings today come at an important moment in the relationship so that we can further clarify areas of common objectives, areas of common interest, even when our tactical approaches may be different.
Well, Tillerson arrived in Russia from the G7 ministers meeting in the Italian city of Lucca, where the group failed to agree on a targeted sanctions against the Russian and Syrian military forces. Well, as VOA's State Department correspondent Cindy Sain reports, Syria's alleged chemical weapons attack on its own civilians last week and the retaliatory U.S. military strike are likely to complicate hopes for closer U.S.-Russian cooperation under President Donald Trump.
Speaking at a meeting with G7 foreign ministers in Italy, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said after years of supporting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, Russia now has a choice to make.
Russia has really aligned itself with the Assad regime, the Iranians, and Hezbollah. Is that a long-term alliance that serves Russia's interest? Or would Russia prefer to realign with the United States, with other Western countries and Middle East countries who are seeking to resolve the Syrian crisis?
Tillerson said he and other world leaders agree that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end. And he had tough words for Russia for not making sure Assad eliminated his stockpile of chemical weapons.
It is unclear whether Russia failed to take this obligation seriously or Russia has been incompetent. But this distinction doesn't much matter to the dead.
Later in the day, the White House press secretary was asked if Assad has to go.
There's no question that you can't have a peaceful Syria with Assad in charge. I don't see how that ever works.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is unlikely to reverse course on propping up Assad just because the U.S. says it is on the wrong side of history. Analyst Thomas Wright told VOA.
If Russia were to reconsider its support for Assad, it would need tangible concessions in return, things that it really wanted. And the problem is all of the things that it really wants are things that the United States, for very good reason, will be very reluctant to give, such as concessions in Eastern Europe and Ukraine or over NATO expansion.
Regardless of the outcome, many around the world will be closely watching this first visit to Russia by a senior member of the Trump administration. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
Well, tensions are also high on the Korean peninsula over the North Korea's accelerated nuclear and ballistic missile testing and the increasing talk of a U.S. preemptive strike. Now, a few South Koreans are actually concerned by the prospect of imminent conflict. VOA's Brian Patton reports from Seoul that many in the South Korean capital see the increased military posturing as just more political brinkmanship.
Carefree crowds are flocking to Yeouido Park in Seoul to see the cherry blossoms at their peak this week. Few here are concerned this region may be on the brink of war.
Well, it is scary to talk about war, as I am from the generation which never experienced war. But I don't really feel fear yet.
North Korea and the United States seem increasingly poised for conflict over Pyongyang's repeated nuclear and ballistic missile tests aimed at developing the capability to target the U.S. mainland. Washington moved a naval strike force led by the USS Carl Vinson into the region over concerns that the North will soon conduct its sixth nuclear test. U.S. President Donald Trump said in a tweet that North Korea was looking for trouble, while Pyongyang warned it would retaliate against American aggression with nuclear weapons specifically targeting both South Korea and the U.S. mainland. The flare-up in tensions, however, is not causing any sense of panic in Seoul, which is situated within range of the North's massive artillery and missile arsenal. Many in South Korea see the current crisis as political theater that has been played out repeatedly in the past.
I have heard similar stories many times before. I think the possibility for war is very low.
Some see the increased U.S. military posturing as a rite of passage for a new American president to demonstrate toughness and resolve.
Every time the U.S. had a new president, we had similar types of crises, but we passed through them without any major struggle.
Ultimately, many in South Korea expect that all sides in the standoff will act with restraint to keep the peace, rather than face the risk of triggering a war that no one can win. Brian Patton, VOA News, Seoul.
Now, pressure is mounting on South African President Jacob Zuma to resign. Several thousand people gathered in the nation's capital on Wednesday to protest against the president just days after the opposition called countrywide marches to demand Zuma step down. The protesters plan to march through the city's streets to hold a rally at a field outside the union buildings at the site of Zuma's offices. More than 60,000 people marched last Friday calling for Zuma to quit. Zuma, who turned 75 on Wednesday, is accusing some of the protesters of racist motives. Zuma has survived previous protests, but the main opposition party, Democratic Party, and other parties behind the protest believe they can drum up support to force him out of office.
I'm sick and tired in Jacob Zuma. You know, you are all from ANC, but you know what? You are sick and tired for this Zuma.
We're marching so that Zuma answers for all of the wrongdoings. We want him to step down. If he cannot account for what is right for South Africa. We are fighting for that freedom, for economic freedom. That's what we're fighting for.
While the opposition has called for a no-confidence vote against Zuma in Parliament on April the 18th. Not too far from South Africa, Zambia's outspoken opposition leader has been arrested for the second time in about 6 months, a party spokesman told VOA on Tuesday. The arrest is part of a larger fallout from a contentious August presidential election that both contenders claim to have won. Opposition spokesman Charles Kakoma says police broke through the doors of opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema his home late Monday, tear-gassed the occupants and took Hichilema away. Kakoma says the party was warned that this might happen because of an incident days before in which Hichilema's convoy crossed paths with President Edgar Lungu's motorcade as the two men were attempting to attend the same ceremony in western Zambia. Kakoma says police had not charged Hichilema by morning and have taken him to a police training academy for questioning. Lungu's office could not be reached for comment, but a statement on the presidency's Facebook page says the institution doesn't recognize people who come to the ceremony with the aim of disrupting it. Well, Somali officials say security forces have rescued 8 Indian sailors who were taken to land by pirates on Monday. The mayor of Hobyo town, Abdullahi Ahmed Ali, told VOA Wednesday that the sailors from MSV Al Kausar are safe and in the hands of security forces. He says the security forces detained 4 pirates who were holding the crew after moving them from their boat off to the coast of Hobyo. 2 other sailors had been found on the boat after the security forces took it over during the early hours of Monday, bringing the total crew to 10. Now, the boat was taken by the pirates on April 1st off the coast of Somalia while transporting commercial goods to the town of Kismayu. Well, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi recently visited Washington to meet U.S. President Donald Trump. It was Sisi's first White House visit since being elected president in 2014. Now, former U.S. President Barack Obama had never extended an invitation to Sisi. For insight on the future of U.S.-Egypt relations, VOA's Mohammed El-Shenawi spoke with U.S. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, a co-chair of the Congressional Egypt Caucus.
He is a fine spokesman for Egypt on this because he expresses what's in his heart, and what's in his heart is that Christians and Muslims and Jews should get along and should treat each other with respect and live at peace. So President Sisi's visit here, I think, underscores this really positive nature and positive goal that we can all share in.
Former Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights and Democracy said that Egypt didn't participate with the coalition in the fight against the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. If that's the case, how would President Trump rely on President Sisi to be a major ally in fighting terrorism?
Well, the most important thing, of course, is that General Sisi, now President el-Sisi, having been elected by his people, not engage in struggles elsewhere, but that he makes sure that the huge threat and the terrorist and Islamo-fascist elements that would try to change Egypt into a totalitarian Islamic caliphate, that those forces are defeated. So we need him to pay attention to what's going on at home. No one should expect him to be sending his forces someplace else at a time when his country itself is being targeted by these evil forces.
What could the U.S. do to help Egypt in fighting terrorists in Sinai?
Well, the first thing we could do is make sure that General Sisi can buy the long-range weapon systems that can deal with that type of vast area in order to pacify a huge area like the desert.
You were quoted saying that President Sisi is more important to U.S. security than F-35. Why?
Well, the F-35s, many of us are very upset that our government wasted billions of dollars in developing an aircraft that we don't think is a superior aircraft. And so we spent billions of dollars on what we consider to be a not useless project, but one that wasn't didn't justify that expenditure. And anything we can do to help the people of Egypt and President el-Sisi to, number one, unify and make sure that they serve as an example where Christians and Muslims can live together in a country with a government respecting everyone's rights. That success of President Sisi in showing a better way, and the success of the people of Egypt and President el-Sisi in defending their country against armed attack by radical fanatics and terrorists, a lot rests on his shoulders. And I think that his success will have a lot more to do with saving the world from an evil force and from turmoil and bloodshed than will a bunch of F-35 aircraft for the United States military.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com and find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Coming up, the challenges Gambia faces after decades of one-party rule. Stay with us.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
A medical engineering first from scientists at Madrid's Carlos III University. Skin made from a 3D printer. They say it will act as fully functioning human skin that could be used for transplants and research.
Applying
3D bioprinters is a real breakthrough. It's changed the way people think, says Jose Luis Horcano. The key component is a kind of bio-ink, loaded with components containing human skin cells and fibroblasts. We produce 100% human skin with its two main layers, dermis and epidermis, able to create its own collagen, says Alfredo Brissac of the Biodan Group. The scientists say the bioprinted skin offers great potential for cosmetics or pharmaceuticals, and their prototype can produce 100 square centimeters in about 35 minutes. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
I wanted to present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
Well, newly elected Gambian President Adama Barrow's government is taking steps to restore the economy, rule of law and political reforms after 2 decades of one-party rule. Gambia's vice president recently visited the United States to thank its partners for the help they provided during the nation's political impasse. In an exclusive interview, Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang told VOA's Mariama Diallo about the challenges her country is facing, such as the lack of water and electricity, possible currency depreciation, and proposed cuts in aid from the United States.
We have initiated with our partners has yielded to positive results because they have indicated their commitment from the Congress to the State Department, and other partners have indicated their interest to support the Gambia in rebuilding a new Gambia with a new democratic dispensation. His regime, the 22-year regime, was quite a challenging regime. There was no freedom of expression, no freedom of association. Institutions were dormant because of his dictatorial handling of the state.
There were reports that when he left the country, he also took a lot of cash with him. Is that true?
From the state of things, we have realized that so many things have gone wrong. An economy that had only 2 months export, national reserve, is an indication that there was bad governance. We also have to know that we are living in an era where everybody by experience is supposed to be looking out for what and holding public officers accountable to the Constitution that which they had sworn in to protect. However, the experience we have had is that he has acquired a lot of assets, both landed and unlanded assets and financial assets. Now, we do not want to make any statement on the magnitude of the misappropriation that he has done, simply because we want to really make it an evidence-based matter.
Well, speaking of that and talking about holding some of these leaders accountable, I know that when Jammeh was in power, at some point he decided that Gambia was going to get out of the International Criminal Court. And I think when Barrow won the elections, he talked about Gambia will stay with the ICC. So is he going to be pursued, for example, or prosecuted? Is it something that your country is thinking about in the long run or in the short term?
We are saying that the matter of ICC should be really a matter that should be confined to the legal system. This is a new government of a democratic dispensation that does not want to interfere into other matters of non-partisan. For instance, the state wants to be executive, have to distinguish between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature.
Well, moving forward to today, our you know, what's happening today in Gambia. There are certain reports, obviously, that there is, let's say, lack of electricity or lack of water. I'm just curious to know, what is the government doing to work on issues like that?
Just as we have discussed with Her Excellency the Karen Bass, Congresswoman, and Congressman John Smith, we have realized that the challenges are enormous. It is relatively normal to have African countries lacking certain infrastructural development, communication, energy, and so forth. But our country is unique. This is just to show you that has been bad governance in terms of political and economic governance, because you cannot understand and cannot appreciate that a small country of the size of 1.8 million will, at this stage of development, lack electricity, lack water. Because if we go to the rural areas, there are still women using the well system. You know, water and sanitation is poor. The health sector has been really been fragmented. The infrastructure is very poor.
There's also talk about the dollar-C and maybe currency depreciation. Is this something that you guys are already looking into and gearing up for?
We are looking at it. The macroeconomy was weak when we took over, but now it has started being improved. We have got the World Bank that has provided us with $60 million for budget support. The EU has also provided us, and the United Nations system also, through its interagency mechanism, is also out to help us. There are also bilateral donors who are willing to help us, like the State Department, the United States government, the UK government, through their own mechanisms.
Well, I actually have a quick question about aid in general, and you talk about the United States, but from the new administration, from what we've heard, basically that they are thinking about cutting aid in general, and how something like that will affect a country like Gambia.
America is the big brother. If America has cold, it sneezes, everybody gets a cold. So it is important that they realize that the rest of the world is looking up to them in terms of democratic culture, in terms of support, financial and economic advice support, policy support. So this is affecting the whole world, and our position is to really join the many voices who want to encourage the government of America, the American government, to reconsider the budget cuts, particularly in critical areas like economy, peace building, security reform, health, particularly when they know that their mechanism, like the USAID, which is usually present in many developing countries, has been playing a critical role in supporting the development agenda of countries.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. At the start of Vista, Pope Francis opens a laundromat for Rome's homeless. We'll be right back.
Every song has a different meaning to each person that hears it and interprets it differently. Border Crossings is unique in that it lets the listeners decide what we're playing. But we bring in guests so that our audience has access to some of the biggest names in pop music today. And we reach out to the audience each and every day in different ways.
Hamilton Live is a live audience performance. With live music, you have that interaction. There's nothing like getting that immediate feedback from the folks that you're performing to. They feel it and they respond back to you. You see it in their eyes. You know that you're connecting with them. Like if any form of communication, it's that response that you get back.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Pope Francis has opened a new laundromat for the homeless to wash, dry, and iron their clothing and blankets. The facility, not far from the Vatican, has 6 washing machines, 6 dryers, and several ironing boards and irons. Plans are underway to add showers, barber service, wardrobes, and medical assistance. Throughout his papacy, Pope Francis has made an effort to reach out to the homeless in Rome. In 2013, the Pope opened a free barber shop and showers under the Vatican colonnade for the homeless. In 2015, he opened a dormitory for homeless men not far from St. Peter's Basilica. One next up, a clothes designer in Israel is attempting to change the bias of the fashion trade by replacing her larger size labels with the positive messages for women. Noah Rubin has created her own unique size labels ranging from A, amazing, B, beautiful, C, chic, D, divine, F, fabulous, and G, gorgeous. She had the idea after attending a local fashion fair. Women came to her asking whether XL was the biggest size available. Rubin recalls a friend asking her if it didn't bother her. She was constantly asked about sizes. Fans of Rubin's sizing system say it is nice to be considered amazing or divine rather than a letter or a number. Well, and finally, squeezed between the African and Euro-Asian tectonic plates, Italy is one of the most earthquake-prone countries in the world. A new test conducted by the Italian National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development shows that reinforcing walls with a mesh of steel and basalt more than doubles the structure's resistance to earthquakes. Italian scientists have been hard at work to make their country's old buildings more resilient to strong tremors since a string of earthquakes that hit central Italy in August and October, killing more than 200 people and destroying precious artifacts. And that's our show today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Most people enjoy listening to music. But is this expression actually about songs and tunes?
Music to my ears.
Jonathan, I cannot believe we have to work over the weekend.
Did you not hear the news? The meeting for the project got canceled. No work this weekend after all.
Awesome! That is music to